All right, Kevin, JAG University, June 1st is upon us. We are a couple weeks away into our favorite time of the year.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm actually kidding. I'm actually not, because it's summertime, but it's also hurricane season. Biggest question we get is, and I think it's something important we talk about, is how do you decipher, how do you navigate, how do you find your windstorm deductible?
Okay, yeah. So basically, it applies if you're a homeowner's client or a commercial client. Just start at your declarations page. You go there, and if you're in South Florida like us or most parts of Florida, you'll probably see a percentage, 3%, 5%, something like that, and
Now,
that's your deductible.
Well, now the percent is defined in different ways. We'll get into that, but just high level, right? It's a percentage of what?
That would be, so on a homeowner side of your dwelling coverage. So if you have $300,000 in your dwelling coverage and your hurricane deductible is 3%, your deductible is 3% of that 300,000. On a commercial side, if you have $1 million in building coverage and your deductible is 5%, it would be 5% of that $1 million in your building.
So the total TIV on a commercial policy.
Yeah, total TIV. And if you have business personal property as well, throw that in there. But that's basically it. So it's a percentage deductible of that total dwelling or building value.
And once you kind of figure that out, I think you got to do a deeper dive into how these wind or hurricane deductibles are actually defined. Because there's different variables, right? You have what we consider a hurricane deductible, which is considered what?
Yeah, hurricane deductible is a named hurricane. Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Wilma, Hurricane Katrina.
So named category 1 storm and higher, correct?
Exactly. So if it's a tropical depression, it would not be subject to your hurricane deductible.
So yeah, because I feel like now in the news, you have every news channel naming any storm.
Yeah.
So as long as if you have a named, or let's say a hurricane deductible, anything under a category 1, whether it's a tropical storm, tropical depression, or just a really bad rainstorm, that would fall under, in a typical situation, under either your AOP or out of the wind deductible.
Correct. Yes, some policies, especially on the commercial side, you'll have your hurricane deductible or your named storm deductible, but then you'll have your all other wind deductible. So some random tropical cyclone number 7 hits you, that would fall into your all other wind. That's probably going to be somewhere in the middle of your normal deductible and your hurricane deductible.
And how much, just percentage-wise, most people, when we talk about the deductible, how surprised are you that most insurers just aren't clearly comfortable of how that deductible is applied?
Yeah, so most people think that their percentage deductible they have is the percentage of the claim that they're responsible for paying. So they think, okay, I have $50,000 in damage.
3% of that.
3% of that, that's my deductible.
Right.
But no, it's of the entire dwelling. So if you have a $400,000 replacement cost on your house, on your policy, that 3% of that $400,000, that's your deductible, not of the loss itself. I think that's the biggest misconception that I see. Most people tend to think it's of the claim itself, but no, it's of the dwelling value itself or the building value.
Now, to even do a deeper dive, how are these deductibles applied? Because there's a difference between we consider, and again, we're going to go more on either on a commercial side or on the surplus line side. You have the per occurrence, right? Per calendar year.
Yeah.
And there's huge difference too, right? On how it's applied.
Yeah. So for example, let's say you have $1 million building and a 5% deductible, right? That's $50,000, I hope. So
I checked. You're right.
That's why I used $1 million and 5%. But so it's $50,000. That's your 5% of your building, right? So if you have an occurrence deductible and you have 3 hurricanes, your deductible is $50,000 for each hurricane of that year. But let's say you have a calendar year deductible of $50,000 and you use up that $50,000 on the first claim, you're not going to have that remaining deductible for future hurricanes in that calendar year.
Right. And that's such a huge difference. When you kind of, that's when you're looking at different options, that's such a huge variable in how the pricing is affected as well, right?
Exactly. So it's, let's say you have 2 policies, different carriers, there's a $500 difference between the 2 or $1,000 difference between the 2. But one's calendar year deductible versus one an occurrence deductible. In the event you have 2 storms, you're $50,000 better off on the calendar year deductible policy rather than the occurrence policy. And a lot of times down here in South Florida, you'll see you get multiple storms in one season.
We have multiple scares.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So it's not crazy to think that you have multiple hurricanes and may even have to file multiple claims.
So here's the last one, right? The even X factor. Sometimes when we have multiple locations, right, on a real estate schedule,
Yeah.
which we do a lot. We play a lot in that space. And how is the deductible applied, either per location or per TIV,
Yeah, so
aka blanket?
exactly, right? And that's another thing that you want to think about. So let's say you have 10 locations and you have a 5% deductible. You need to be sure if you have a per location or that blanket per policy deductible. Because if you have 10 locations and they're $1 million each, so that's $10 million in building coverage, and you have 5% of that, that's $500,000 as your hurricane deductible. You're basically paying everything under $500,000 on your own. Versus if you have everything else the same, 10 buildings, $1 million each, but you have 5% per location deductible, that means per location your deductible is $50,000 for each separate claim.
And there's some, again, there's some carriers that tend to kind of write forms that way. A lot of times it's not explained. But the truth is, if you're writing a percentage deductible across the total schedule, at that point, you're basically self-insuring. Because you'll even look at, in terms of, and by the way, besides that, there's a minimum per occurrence.
Correct.
Per location. Insurance companies are smart. You're going to see they'll run something we call a PML, right? They don't just throw darts against the board and to kind of give you a deductible. A lot of times they're modeling things to kind of back into what would be, how can we basically scale or put our percentage deductible higher than the per location TIV. So you're really not going to be covered. It's almost like not even the point of buying wind.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to really make sure it makes sense. If your deductible is $500,000 essentially in your portfolio and it costs you $40,000 to replace a roof on any one of your buildings, I mean, you need 10 roofs to be blown off to even approach that deductible.
Right.
So then it's like, hey, when does this make sense and when does this not make sense? Is this money better applied just holding in reserves for repairs as they come up, or fortifying my buildings and improving the roofs or the windows or what have you? Where is it better spent? And that's an analysis you can perform with an educated agent. And a lot of the times too, I mean, from my time as an underwriter, as an agent, a lot of these quotes don't always specify if the deductible is per location or per policy. You have to ask.
Correct.
So you just send a quote out, hey, 5%, great. I'm used to it being per building. I have 5 locations here. And then you have a claim get filed and whoa, everyone's finger pointing. Hey, you never told me. This person never told you. And it
happens more than you think. It's hurricane season. More than anything, your hurricane deductible, remove the assumptions, find out how it's being applied, when it's being applied, how many times a year will it be applied per occurrence or one time a year. But really do a deep dive, know your deductible.
Exactly. Knowing how it works would allow you to really plan out how you're using your money, what reserves you need, and then what you're going to do if something happens.